part of today. And we have two success stories, so real life examples of master's project. So we have Caruana, who talked to us about his experience with that peer mentorship program, and Stella Borchbacher will talk about her projects about writing.
Okay, so Censu Caruana. I work at the Center for Environmental Education and Research at the University of Malta. I will be sharing some lessons I learned from this experiment project and supplementing it together there with some other lessons I learned from other projects. But experiment was a particularly challenging project because, first of all, we had the lead role as the University of Malta. Secondly, it came bang in the middle of the COVID crisis. So we always had to stay really focused on what we want from this project. It was a K-2 project, so it was a transnational project. It involved schools, and it was about innovation. So actually, we had to create an innovative model. And I will explain in more detail in the coming slides, but the idea was very simple. In the business world, mentoring, coaching is quite popular, but not so much amongst teachers. And when it is popular amongst teachers, it is usually in the first 2 years when you do your first years of service and you are paired with a more established mentor. But the idea of teachers meeting together to support each other, to share resources, is not so popular. So actually, I will explain in more detail, but when we did the need analysis, we realized that this was not just a Maltese problem, but it was actually a European problem, that most European countries were telling us the same thing, that teachers come out from learning institutions with ideas, then we go in the daily life of a teacher, there are no real support structures, and then, your enthusiasm starts fizzling away. So actually, the aim was to create a specific model on peer mentoring, but with a focus on education for sustainable development. And education for sustainable development is what we call a cross-curricular subject. To make it simple, if I have a mathematics teacher, or an English language teacher, or a geography teacher, it's the same. Because I need to learn how to integrate sustainability thinking in my lesson planning, in my curriculum development, and so on. So these are the project partners to give you a bit of a just idea of the geographic distribution. So Malta, Slovenia, France, Italy, Croatia, and Italy. And particularly interesting was that in the case of Italy, we have an NGO as one of our partners. And this was an NGO, IMLAL, which was very much involved in global citizenship education and in development projects overseas. So the idea was also to have in our consortium someone with experiences on the ground in different countries to help feed such experiences into the curriculum development. And then the others were a mix of centers. So we were a university, and most of the others are more teacher training institutes. So this was a higher education institution. This was a teacher institute. This was an NGO made up of teachers. And the other one was a youth organization focusing a lot on education and training. Okay, this is important. So, success doesn't mean an easy ride. But it is life, it's always like that. we think that when we talk about something that from the outside looks successful, we don't sometimes appreciate the pains that took place behind the scenes. So I will try to talk also on this, because at the end we are talking about real life experiences. So how did the idea come? Funnily enough, I received an email from the Faculty of Education, just talking about these peer mentoring circles that happen in Finland. So Finland is a country very famous for these circles where people mentor each other. And I just was thinking, I was saying, if only, this practice starts in schools. So I knew an Italian organization. I wrote a half-page concept and told them, like, do you think it makes sense to apply this model to our schools? Because I think it's important for one. What would you say? And they said, we have also contacts with a network of teachers that are toying up with the idea amongst our teachers. And slowly we started getting the idea that it's a good project, the concept is good, it's useful. So this is what I tried to say in the beginning, that although mentoring and peer mentoring, especially in the business world, is something which we talk a lot about, it's not so much used in formal education. And what I tried to explain that the business of day-to-day sometimes drains you. So we need to sort of rekindle and find new avenues so that teachers keep their passion and enthusiasm about important subjects such as sustainability, which right now is on the top of the global agenda. So this was also an issue that we did needs analysis. And although each country has some sort of commitment to education for sustainable development, partly because governments signed this Agenda 2030, you might have heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, yes, these 70 goals. And so there's a formal commitment. Goal 4 is about education, 4.7 is about education for sustainable development and the global citizenship education. So it exists. But actually, the real policies often don't reflect this commitment. And we also were very much aware that there are so many demands on teachers, Teachers are required to have a new and unprecedented competencies to lead pupils towards values of peace, solidarity, and democracy, and simultaneously allow them to understand complex phenomena using knowledge from different subjects. These are daily pressures and we realized that the existing national systems of teachers training appeared to be partially inadequate. So we wanted to create this new model. To put it very, very simply, the model was based on first doing an in-depth study of the local context, as well as a general study of the European context. Why did we need a European context? Because we needed examples of best practice. Like in English, you say, you clutch on straws. In a way, we wanted to clutch on straws in the sense that we wanted to find the best practice gathered throughout Europe that would somehow inspire us. Because this model wasn't in existence, but you already had some ideas happening here and there in different European countries. So basically, we did a mapping of best practice in Europe, which is somehow related to mentoring or to mentoring or sustainable development education to start inspiring us. Then we created a curriculum to train education specialists. And then, together with the education specialists, we worked with schools to create what we call the local training groups. But basically, the local training groups are these circles, teachers that meet together to learn how to infuse sustainability into their lesson planning. So in Malta, we did it with 2 groups. In other countries, they did it with much more, especially Italy, who had access to the consulted l'Istituto Professionale, so it was a consortium of teachers. And we also learned a lot through what we call actually peer mentoring each other. So the idea that we wanted to propagate within the project, we try to also practice it amongst ourselves. For example, the consortium of Istituto Professionale, the technical consortium, were very, very knowledgeable about a particular methodology called requests. And they found that requests was a good methodology to support teachers in integrating sustainability education in their work. So we did a training, and as I will show later on, we actually went over and above the reporting requirements. Why? Because the process itself sometimes shows you things that you wouldn't have envisaged at the writing phase of the program. So we knew that requests could be an interesting methodology, but actually we found that it is a new methodology for most teachers. So we actually even did a 16 or 17-minute video on how to design a request, for example, which wasn't really required, but it still helped us in our project. So basically, the idea was to have some education specialists and then teachers that are part of these local training and testing groups. And we ourselves at university and the education specialists help set up and support these peer mentoring circles. And then, of course, we needed to test it out. We took videos of what was happening in schools. We did the questionnaires amongst teachers. We created a number of evaluation tools to gather the data. And then we actually created the model. We actually did a publication that reflects this model. And also, for example, in the case of the University of Malta, we actually accredited the learning to a 4BCTS model that we can now offer to our students. So this model actually became an accredited module. Okay. I will not click on it, but this is actually a hyperlink. I don't know if you have Wi-Fi, but actually if you click on this hyperlink, it takes you to the website. But I know that usually technology creates problems. But anyway, this is if you manage it, it's good, but this is a screenshot of our website. We are calling it a legacy website because the project ended, but the website is still functional and we want it to stay functional because on this website, we have all our publications. So if you can press resources and scroll up a bit, you will see that all of the booklets that we can download. If you go further up, these are examples of student work. These are the final intellectual outputs, the actual publications. This is the training guide for education specialists. Like it, we have a training guide for teachers. Interesting, some organizations went one step deeper. And after we created the model, they reflected again on the application of the model back to the country context. So, for example, this output was not originally envisaged in the project proposal, but the French organization took our output and then rehashed it to give it more of a context for their own teachers. So I think in this way, it was a very interesting process. If you can press on this, please. And you press view now. Okay, I think I got the wrong link, don't worry. Because anyway, but down here we have the one of the, okay, these are just some photos of, but I wanted to find the video, but it doesn't matter. You can go back to the website. Back. Perhaps scroll up a bit, please. Yes, it's this, sorry. Can you? So for example, this basically can be used by anyone now who is not familiar with the methodology of a web quest. And the idea is that, of course, like all of these projects, the materials and intellectual outputs are freely available for anyone. But we decided to use what today we are calling multimodal. In other words, some could be texts, and in our case, this was not originally envisaged, but we further developed our model. And over here, it gives a bit of an idea because through visual images, you can see students working, students showing the results of their quest. What is a quest? A quest is a search for a solution. So you start with an environmental problem or with a development problem, and then you do a quest. And so you see children actually working in this quest, and it's called a web quest because it's the opposite of what sometimes we do in our schools. In our schools, we are very much afraid of using the internet. My son once was allowed to take the mobile to school and had to see it in an envelope, open it for half an hour, close it because he was still quite afraid. A web quest actually says, listen, you can make use of all of that information to solve your quest. And to do that, you need some special skills. One of the skills is to sort through fake news, for example, and to try and understand reliable websites. But isn't this what we need our students to be doing, rather than the opposite? So, unfortunately, because of COVID, we had a training envisaged, which would have included a training for the participating institutions from an expert on media and social media on how to sort through the reliable websites and through what could be fake news. This was one of the things which unfortunately couldn't happen because not only did COVID strike in the middle of the project, but it actually strike, I don't know if the right word, directly in the part of Italy where we had 2 weeks to do the training. So you all remember the Lombardia region in the beginning of COVID. It was chaotic. So you can also imagine that while we were doing this project, there were a lot of emotions and a lot of fears and so on. So perhaps we can go back to this slide, please. But anyway, like you can really look at that website and open and download all of the resources. So yeah, next slide. So I did a bit of a PMI, yeah, plus minus interesting points. It's a very simple evaluation tool actually that you can use in any session. And when you ask people to mention the positives, the pluses, the negatives, the minuses, and the interesting points. And I find it much better than good and bad, because we are so quick to judge something. Sometimes you just need to stay with that point. Say, this is interesting, this is a new insight. So it's a simple tool, but by allowing people to just remark on something that without needing to judge it as black or white, good or bad, I find this tool very, very interesting. So as part of my sharing, I did a short PMI. So for me, these are some of the pluses that I had in my project. We had a lot of focus on process. I remember, especially in the beginning, when COVID is putting our project completely out of track. We kept on trying to do all the multipliers. We kept on trying to do all the trainings. But at the same time, we saw everything like, we plan a day to postpone. We plan a day to postpone. And then we meet again and we say, shall we keep on postponing or shall we have to say this one? We have to accept we cannot do. And I remember some very tense meetings. Tense, not because there was a bad air amongst us, on the opposite, we had a very good support amongst us, but tense because we were completely directionless, like we had everything planned. This training was planned to the details that we actually had people, the list of people covering the agenda. And suddenly we really want to do it, but is it responsible to do it? Is it ethical to do it? Is it that? So at that time, I remember I gave as much time as we needed for process. We had usually a Skype call once a month. So for 10 to 6 months, a bit less in reality, because in the first 2 months we worked mainly by email. But we had actually a Skype call once a month. And of course, during the times of COVID, we gave a lot of time for processing. So the idea was that any decision that we arrive to is done in a participatory manner. And during these once a month meetings, we used to send an agenda beforehand. So it helps people think beforehand on what they would want to contribute, what they would like to say. Of course, we inbuilt the monitoring and evaluation of the project. Every meeting we created tools, especially to evaluate, monitor. This was an actual interesting point, because as I said, for example, the Italians, when we did the final evaluation of the project, they remarked that even for them, it was one of the first experiences to have a teacher institution and an NGO working closely together, and they found it enriching. So it got some new, even internal collaborations. And again, many people went out of their way. So for example, it wasn't foreseen, actually I have a mistake here, this is Croatia, not Slovenia. It wasn't foreseen for Croatia to visit Italy during their multiplier event, but they had some trainings going on. The Croatia partner thought that they would really gain, and they managed some internal funds and they actually visited. So this was again some plus, not envisaged, but people over participated, if you want, because they thought that the learning could happen there. So I think that it's better to be very realistic about these projects, not to fall into the trap of promising everything and not being able to actually do it. Recently, it wasn't linked to university, but recently someone showed me a project, and I told her, like, if I were you, I would run away, because it was so much well in such a short time. And if you are like really systematic, you can do it, you know. But I think it's very important to be very realistic and then leave space for extra things, like two partners want to get together to learn from each other. We had the possibility to do some extra thing, we do it. We did it in a multimodal way because it was a better communication. So these, I think, are some of the pluses. Designing appropriate evaluation tools and monitoring and evaluating regularly. Perhaps we can go there. These are some minuses. First of all, I missed one important detail. And I wrote it here because if you really believe in an idea, it doesn't mean that if the project wasn't chosen the first time, you cannot resubmit. So in truth, the first time, the project was, the idea of the project was submitted in Italy, and it got a good mark, but it wasn't chosen because of the huge competition. And it's extremely competitive. We still thought it was a good idea, and 1 year later we redrafted it. We resubmitted with 1 or 2 less partners, because in the meantime 1 or 2 partners were no longer interested in this partnership, and then we got it through. But in the editing process from year 1 to year 2, we did some small mistakes, so we wasted the first month just sorting out these small mistakes. So it took a bit longer to actually start. When we evaluated ourselves, we thought that if we had to do the project again, we would need to strengthen the external evaluation, in the sense that we created a scientific committee, but the scientific committee was made from our own members, even though some of them were not directly running the project. But although each and every intellectual output used to pass to the scientific committee, and sometimes it went back and forth 3 or 4 times. We still thought that having an external evaluation, someone who would not be doing the normal work of the project, but still a partner, could have strengthened the quality of the module. And thirdly, you might know about the European Platform on Adult Learning. We tried, it wasn't envisaged in the project, but it came out from our discussions. We tried to continue this community of practice that we created in the project through IPALE, but unfortunately, although now 1.5 years passed since 1 year, 3 months passed since the end of this project, we thought that we can continue the debate, but actually it didn't happen. So we do have a community of practice opened on the European platform, which is continuing the debate on peer mentoring and sustainability, but it didn't really. One of the problems could be actually that even the platform is trying to catch up. So the things are a bit slow. Okay, so these are some interesting points. The NGO university collaboration, like people who can systematize research, so university and people have a lot of experiences on the ground. We actually never wanted an extension. And I think in general, it's much better to stick to the timeline, even though you know that you might need to fall onto an extension, you know. At the end, although we really didn't want to end up asking for an extension, basically it was, again, the hope that COVID would give us some more space to still do what we needed to do. And again, like I said, success is like this. So for example, in Slovenia, during our project, there was a teacher strike. And we were working with teachers. So we have to continue the project, but at the same time, for 4 months, teachers went on strike. So the timelines need to be really flexible, but we found a way how different partners can move at slightly different paces with cutoff points coming for all, so that you can then confront and compare what's happening. And this is very hard. But I have to do some allowances, like I said, teachers are on strike. What do you do? You have to allow it. Okay. Although I said the IPALE didn't work out, but the collaboration is continuing in different ways. So just 1 month ago, we submitted a project with some of the same partners. And since this project was on peer mentoring, and right now we are working on a project about communities of practice, we could use the results of this project to feed in part of the research taking on in the other project. So in a way, the process continues. And of course, now, beyond the time frame of the project, we are left with a module, which was the result of this research, and that can be taken up and chosen by our students throughout different years. Okay, finally, just a few points. Being a lead partner is time consuming. So it's good to be aware of this. It's important to do our homework, especially if you're a big partnership. So who is best positioned to propose the project, both from an administrative point of view, and where ought it be presented? I mean, if you are presenting a project and you know that it's extremely competitive in one country, perhaps a bit less in the other, you will still be doing the same project. You will still be reaching the same outputs. So it's good, I think, to be a bit strategic. In reality, you're always challenged to go beyond your comfort zone. You need to do a tender. Of course, in the case of university, we have a lot of support from different offices, the project office, so they help us in the admin, the legal work, but it's still something new, you know. So I found myself sort of always challenged with group dynamics, especially when people are fearful, sad about, you know, and working on issues that I am not so familiar with, but it was also a huge learning experience. I'm mentioning this because I refuse projects quite often, and I will tell you why. 2 weeks ago, I received a very nicely written concept note, but the subject line said naqra urgenti.
It's very
A bit urgent, sorry. A bit urgent. And I looked at the description and it was really written well, but I knew that to be able to successfully manage this project, I needed schools who believe in this project. And I knew that I don't have time to check with schools if they find this project useful for their project. And I didn't want to do the mistake to go for the project, get it funded, and then I end up with the problem of, okay, let me see if schools are because it would be, you know, completely stressful. First of all, I don't want to stress, you know, like I want to work on the project. So I think it's also very important to be very realistic, especially if you need partners like teachers. Check beforehand, because otherwise, you know, sometimes when I look at Facebook groups or the Malta, say the general ones, yeah, you have an exchange happening next week, and like you cannot manage a project like that. So I think it's better to say no, or to go slow, get the support, and then write it. In the case of university, we have the benefit of sometimes dividing costs between who's doing the academic work and who's doing part research, part admin. But think of that, because it's better to do what you best know what to do. If I'm doing research, I do research. If you're good at admin, do admin. So it's better to have a team of 3 with each person doing what you can do best, rather than the famous Italian tutorial or trying to do everything, you know, together. Yeah, this I mentioned it already, okay, that if you believe in an idea, sometimes it doesn't get funded. You can get really high marks, but it depends how many others got really high marks that year. So if you believe in it, go for it. Okay, this is my final slide, but just these are like my personal interests. But also I'm mentioning this because, for example, in my center, we are specialists in environmental education and specialists in education for sustainable development. And sometimes organizations put forward projects, but it would be in their interest if they have someone who's, for example, specialized in pedagogy or methodology. So this is more an invite that if you feel you need this support, you can approach university. These are just some of the things I do or did in the past: adult, youth, and community sustainable development education, global education, citizenship education, the role of civil society in transformation of society, food, permaculture, social enterprise, transformative education, the whole idea of tipping points and change, the whole idea of models of development that lead sustainable development, and so on, the social economy. It's interesting also not to go always on the scientific side, but we do sustainable development both for like the more settings, but also for arts, and I think it has a very important role. So for another project, I've just given a training to our teachers in Malta on how to integrate sustainability in their lesson plans and in their curriculum. So I think that's it. So thank you. I just left my details, just in case you would need to contact my center on any support that you might need linked to integrating sustainability, and especially if you need help in methodology or pedagogy, we will be able to support you and take care of it. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Censu. So, yes, if actually we have 2 people in the group for Croatia. So
Okay. I didn't know. You got it. So it's more important that I change the mistake.
Yeah, so basically, these people here from the CEU network for the integration. We have people from DAS and from Split.
That's who's from that, because I just got that proof yesterday that in May I'm doing an exchange with the University of DAS.
Ah.